Have you ever felt that strange chill, even with the sun shining outside? Have you ever been on vacation, surrounded by nature or stunning landscapes, and still had the feeling that something was wrong? Not every getaway is safe. Not every silence means peace. There are places where time seems to stop, and where those who enter don't always come back the same. These stories aren't just scary tales, they're true accounts, lived by ordinary people like you and me. Stories of trails that never end, reflections that don't follow our movements, and voices that keep calling, even years after returning. They are fragmented memories of trips that seemed normal until they left marks impossible to erase. Get ready to discover what really happens when you cross the line between the natural and the unexplainable. Take a deep breath, close the door, and try to remember the scariest part isn't what we see on vacation, it's what we bring back with us. I just wanted to reconnect with nature, escape the city and the suffocating routine. I found a small cabin in the mountains on an obscure forum for alternative travel. The description said, isolated, perfect for absolute rest. There weren't many photos, but the price was irresistible. I booked it without thinking twice. The road there was surrounded by dense forests and almost vanished trails. An old man stopped me on the dirt road and said something I couldn't understand. It sounded like a warning, but I just smiled and kept going. When I arrived at the cabin, everything looked darker than in the pictures. The windows were sealed and there were strange markings on the wood. It was like no one had been there in years. That first night, the silence was so deep, it hurt. At midnight, I heard footsteps upstairs even though I was alone. I went up with a flashlight and found nothing but a mirror covered with a sheet. When I removed it, I saw something behind me that vanished as soon as I turned around. The mirror was cracked, as if it had been punched from the inside. I spent the rest of the night locked in the bedroom, hearing dull thuds coming from the attic. In the morning, I found muddy footprints inside the house, starting from the back door, which was locked from the inside. My instincts told me to leave, but something kept me there. A kind of torpor, like the place was draining my will. In the following days, I started having vivid nightmares, all involving the forest and a man whose face was covered in tree bark. When I woke up, there were wet leaves on the bed. I tried to call for help, but the phone was dead and the car simply wouldn't start. It was like the cabin didn't want me to leave. On the fourth day, I explored the back of the house and found a shallow, freshly disturbed grave. Inside, a wooden box with old newspaper clippings. They all spoke of people who had disappeared in the area. One of the clippings had a photo. It was the face of the old man who tried to warn me on the road. With a trembling hand, I dropped everything. That night, the man from the mirror appeared standing at the edge of my bed. His eyes were empty, and his skin looked decayed. When I screamed, he didn't move. He just pointed to the door. It was slightly open, and a cold wind blew hard, as if trying to drag me out. I ran, barefoot, through the dark woods. I walked for hours until I found an abandoned house. Inside, the walls were covered in symbols drawn with charcoal. In a corner, there was a mattress with dried bloodstains and an old tape recorder. When I pressed play, I heard my own voice begging to leave. But I had never been there before. Or had I? The next morning, a group of hikers found me in a state of shock, speaking nonsense. They kept me in a clinic for 2 weeks, but no one believed my story. They said it was extreme stress. Even today, when I look in the mirror, sometimes I see his reflection, standing behind me. I've never been able to sleep in silence again. The sound of leaves in the wind always sounds like whispers. The cabin was erased from maps and websites, but sometimes in obscure forums, a new listing appears with the same title, Isolated, Perfect for Absolute Rest. And someone always replies, Interested. It was supposed to be a romantic trip. My fiancé and I found a remote island, accessible only by boat, mentioned by a couple on an adventure blog. The name of the island wasn't on any official maps, but the pictures looked like paradise. We wanted something different, far from the resorts, a place where no one could find us. We paid a boatman to drop us off for a week. He hesitated, said it wasn't a common destination. Before leaving, he handed us an old radio. It looked saying cell signal wouldn't work there. We laughed it off, thinking it was an exaggeration. The journey was long, but the view was mesmerizing, until the fog began to roll in. Upon landing, we realized we weren't alone. Small stone sculptures were scattered across the sand, all with faces covered by tied cloths. Some were buried up to their necks. The forest behind the beach was so dense it seemed to be hiding something. Still, we set up camp near an old, abandoned lighthouse. That first night, we heard whispers coming from the woods. We assumed it was just the wind through the trees. But the wind doesn't have footsteps. We woke up to footprints around the tent, too small to be human, but with a bipedal shape. I thought of wild animals, but no creature walks like that. The radio was broken by morning. We explored the lighthouse during the day. Inside, the stairs were covered in symbols scratched into the walls. At the top, there was a wooden chair facing the sea, as if someone spent hours just watching. On the floor, we found seashells arranged in a spiral, and near the window, a picture frame with a photo that looked like my fiancée, only older, faded. She changed after that. Quiet, unresponsive when I spoke to her. Her eyes were fixed on the forest, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. In the middle of the night, I woke up and she was gone. I ran to the lighthouse and found her at the top, standing on the edge, staring out at the ocean. When I spoke, she said, "He's calling." The next morning, I found new stone sculptures in the sand. One of them wore my fiancé's necklace. I screamed her name until my voice gave out, but the forest only echoed my cries. I spent the day searching the island, but everything seemed to move on its own. Trails that once existed vanished, as if the island was closing in on me. I was alone for 2 days, without food, hearing the same phrase whispered in the wind, "He's calling." I started seeing people in the trees, or shadows shaped like people. On the third day, I saw the boatman in the distance and ran to the shore, screaming. He didn't respond. He only motioned for me to swim to the boat. I obeyed. When I looked back, I saw my fiancée standing at the forest's edge, her eyes completely black. She smiled, but it wasn't her. It was something wearing her skin. I dove into the sea and swam like never before. The boatman didn't say a word. He just handed me a blanket and lit a cigarette, his face grim. Today, no one believes me. They say my fiancé fell off a cliff or got lost, but I know what I saw. And at night, when the sea is restless, I still hear that phrase, "He's calling." And I know that one day, the island will call me back, because no one comes back whole from there. It was my brother who found the place. An old house on sale, hidden in the countryside, perfect for a weekend away from everything. He said it was a bargain and that it would be fun to gather the family after so long. It was one of those wooden houses with a wide porch and an old swing in front. It had charm, but something in the air felt off. We arrived at dusk. The trees around it seemed closer than normal. The house was intact, but there was too much dust, as if it had been shut for decades. The strange thing was the smell, a mix of wet earth and rusty metal. We found no one nearby, no neighbors, no sign of life beyond our own footsteps. The first night, we sat by the fireplace, telling childhood stories. Everything seemed normal until the lights flickered. A creak came from upstairs like something dragging. We thought it was the old roof, but the sounds became more frequent. My brother laughed and said it was just the wind. I didn't find it funny. Neither did the dog we brought. He kept staring at the stairs. During the night, I woke up with a suffocating feeling. My room was freezing and the window was open, though I was sure I had closed it. There were marks on the floor like something had dragged itself to my bed. When I looked in the mirror, something moved behind me. But when I turned around, nothing was there. It felt like the house was watching us. The next morning, my niece didn't say a word. She just kept drawing spirals on paper over and over. When we asked what it was, she said, "The thing in the wall showed me." We thought it was her imagination. But then my brother found an inscription in the basement. "The wall breathes when you sleep." We began to suspect this wasn't just an old house. Things got worse. Objects moved around. Old photos appeared in drawers, showing our family in poses we never made. In one of them was my father, but he had died 10 years ago. At night, I heard voices from the walls, calling my name. I tried to ignore them, but they grew clearer, like whispers at my ear. My brother started talking to himself, answering someone invisible. He said the house had old owners, and they were still here. One day, we found him digging the floor in the living room, saying he needed to free the mouth of the house. The walls began to creak loudly, as if they were expanding. It was like the house was waking up. We tried to escape. The front door wouldn't open. The windows were sealed with boards from the inside, though no one had nailed anything. The phone had no signal. The house was swallowing us. Daylight no longer came through the windows. The clock stopped at 3:33. Every night, exactly at that time, the whispers returned, but now in unison. The last night, my niece vanished. We searched everywhere until we heard laughter from the attic. We climbed up, but there was only darkness. A huge mirror stood there, and inside it we saw the house, as if we were outside, looking in. And inside, all of us, standing still. But it wasn't our reflection. It was something mimicking us. I broke a hole in the wall with a chair and escaped through the side of the house. I ran through the forest, hearing distorted screams behind me. I only stopped when I reached a road lit by a passing car. I never saw my brother or niece again. The police came back with me, but found no house, only a clearing. Today I try to forget, but sometimes in dreams I'm still there, trapped in that reflection that smiles with my face. And when I wake at 3:33, my mirror seems fogged, as if someone pressed their face against the other side. My group of friends had been planning this trip for a while, a camping getaway among canyons, waterfalls, and open skies, far from the city and routine. We rented a Jeep, bought tents, and headed into the unknown. The pictures on the website showed breathtaking landscapes overlooking silent valleys, but in person, the place felt too empty. We arrived in the late afternoon and set up camp near the edge of a cliff. The wind blew in irregular bursts, like it whispered in forgotten tongues. The trees around us were crooked, as if leaning away from the abyss. There was a moss-covered sign that barely read, "Silence after sunset." We found it odd, but kept laughing. That first night, we heard noises coming from below the cliff, rocks tumbling as if something were climbing up, though there was no path. We thought it was wildlife. Until one of the friends, joking, shouted, "Who's there?" And the echo answered in a different voice. Not his. A female voice, hoarse, far too slow to be natural. Everyone laughed nervously, trying to brush off the discomfort, but no one slept well that night. In the middle of the night, someone knocked on my tent. When I stepped out, no one was there. Only barefoot prints leading to the cliff. Small prints, almost childlike, but none of the girls in the group would go out barefoot in that cold. The next morning, one of the friends looked pale. He said he dreamed of a hollow-eyed woman kneeling beside him, whispering something unintelligible. Swore it wasn't a dream. Swore he saw her flee toward the cliff. We went there and found marks on the stone, like claws scratching the rock, and a strange symbol made of ash. Still, we chose to stay. Fools. We hiked, swam in the waterfall, pretended nothing was wrong. But the air felt heavier, the taste in our mouths metallic. The echoes began to respond even before anyone spoke. One of the guys refused to sleep the second night. He stayed on watch, lying on the Jeep's hood. In the middle of the night, he screamed. When we ran to him, there was only the sound of the engine running and the radio softly crackling with static, interspersed with children's laughter. We found his boots near the edge of the cliff. No sign of him. We called for hours, screamed until the voices in the echo started laughing back, and then silence fell like a curtain. We tried to leave the next day, but the GPS wouldn't work. The road looked different. The turns led back to the campsite, even after hours of driving. It was like the place wanted us there. The phones were dead. All that remained was the soundtrack of crickets and whispers, growing clearer, closer. By the fourth day, we started disappearing one by one. A girl vanished inside her tent while she slept. The canvas was untouched. Another went to fetch water and never returned. Each time someone vanished, a new childlike footprint appeared in the dirt, facing the center of the camp, as if something small was circling us, or choosing us. In the end, it was just me and one friend left. We made one last effort and followed a trail opposite the cliff. We ran for hours, and then, without warning, we emerged onto a paved road. An old car passed and gave us a ride to the nearest town. No one believed us. They said we were victims of isolation and exhaustion, but sometimes I still get calls from one of the missing numbers. When I answer, I only hear wind and a slow, childlike laugh. Once I heard my own voice recorded whispering, "Silence after sunset." I've never gone near a canyon again, and I still wonder, what was that thing climbing from the abyss? I traveled alone for the first time after the end of my relationship. I wanted to disappear for a few days and ended up finding a rustic hostel in the mountains, isolated, run by a kind old lady. She said the place was ideal for those who wanted to hear themselves again. The road up was narrow, and cell signal disappeared halfway. I was ready to disconnect. I arrived in the early evening. The reception was lit by candles, and the air smelled of herbal tea. The other guests seemed strangely quiet, almost too introspective. A woman stared at me for long seconds without blinking. The room was simple, with a wooden bed and an old mirror with a crooked frame. On the wall, a handwritten phrase, "Who looks too much finds themselves." That first night, I woke to whispers. I thought they came from the hallway, but the sounds seemed to come from the mirror. I lay frozen, listening to words I couldn't understand. When I finally found the courage, I turned on the light, and the mirror was fogged from the inside, as if someone had breathed there. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. At breakfast, I mentioned the whispers. The other guests just smiled, as if it was normal. The old lady served me tea and said, "The house whispers to those who need to hear." I started to suspect everything. The mirror was always too clean, and my reflection sometimes moved differently than me. A slight delay, but real. I decided to explore outside. Behind the hostel, I found it leading to a small lake. The water was dark and still. On the banks, broken mirrors were stuck into the ground like crooked tombstones. In one of them, I saw my face, but with white eyes. I ran back, feeling someone watching me from the trees. The second night, I covered the mirror with a sheet and locked myself in the room. At 3 a.m., the sheet fell on its own. I woke to the sound of shattering glass. The mirror was cracked, and a cut appeared on my face as if it had come from inside the surface. I ran to reception, but it was empty. No one answered. In a panic, I tried to leave. The front door was locked with chains that hadn't been there before. The windows had bars. I was trapped. One of the guests passed by me and whispered, "It's too late to run." He smiled, but all his teeth were the same, like a doll's. I ran upstairs, shaking. The next morning, the old lady found me passed out on the floor. She said I had suffered a breakdown and hurt myself. I was taken to a hospital in the nearest town, but the doctors said there were no cuts on my face. When I asked for my phone, there was only one photo in the gallery, me, in front of the mirror, with completely black eyes. I went back to try to understand what had happened, but I didn't find the hostel. In its place were moss-covered ruins. An old man from the region said the place burned down 10 years ago. All the guests died trapped inside. One of them looked like me. But that's not possible. I was there. I remember. Today I avoid mirrors. Sometimes they still show me that reflection with empty eyes. Always at the same hour, 3 a.m. As if they're waiting for me to return. As if they already know that somehow I never really left that place. When I was a teenager, my grandmother always spoke of a trail no one should follow. She said that once, some young people from the village went in and never came back. I thought it was just a story to keep us out of the woods. Years later, back in town for her funeral, I decided to find that trail. I thought it would be a way to honor her, or prove it was just a legend. I asked some locals, but they all looked away. An older man told me, "If you hear your name being called in there, don't answer." That stuck in my mind. I found an old map among my grandmother's things and went alone with a backpack, flashlight, and recorder. The forest felt like it was breathing. The trail started out normal with dense vegetation and birdsong, but as I walked further, everything grew quiet. The wind stopped. No sound, not even leaves. It felt like walking through a frozen painting. My recorder began to hiss. When I first heard my name from the woods, I froze to the bone. I tried to ignore it, but the voice repeated. It was my grandmother's voice. Same tone, same tenderness. "Come back, my child," she said. I froze. I knew it was impossible. I kept walking, faster, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But every time I didn't answer, the voice grew sadder, more desperate. After a bend, I found a rusty iron gate embedded in the trees, as if the forest had swallowed it. Above it, a broken sign read, "Return not guaranteed." I pushed it open. On the other side, the ground was covered in dry leaves, but they made no sound when stepped on. I started recording, narrating everything. The air there was heavy, dense. Soon I saw an old stone structure, roofless, overtaken by roots. In the center, a wheelchair faced a wall. On it, a battery radio played static. When I approached, the static stopped. Then the recording said, "He is here." The chair turned by itself to face me. I ran without looking back. As I ran, I realized the path was changing. None of it matched what I had seen going in. I began passing objects that seemed to belong to different people. A child's shoe, a doll, a wedding ring, all covered in ancient dirt. I screamed for help, but my voice was muffled, as if the forest didn't want anyone to hear me. At one point, I found my own recorder on the ground, still recording. But I was holding it. In the audio, my voice said, "It's too late. Now he has my name." I dropped everything and ran like never before. When I finally saw light between the trees, I collapsed to my knees. Behind me, soft footsteps stopped at the edge of the shadow. Since that day, I've never been the same. At 4:13 every morning, I hear someone calling me, always with a different voice, always saying my name with a tenderness that cuts like a blade. I close my eyes, cover my ears, but I still hear it, and I feel that if I ever answer, I'll be lost forever. Now, I avoid forests. I sold everything and moved far away. But sometimes the mist creeps through my apartment window, and within it, someone walks barefoot. The trail isn't just in the woods anymore. Now it comes to me. Because once he knows your name, he never stops calling. Some vacations end with photos, others with scars no one can see. You might return home, sleep in your bed, and go back to your routine, but certain experiences don't come back with you. They stay, or worse, they follow you. Because there are places that don't want to be visited, and when you find them, they find you too. These stories keep echoing, as if something wants to be remembered. Maybe a warning, maybe an invitation. So next time you pack your bags, look around more carefully. Listen to the whispers in the air, and if you hear your name coming from an empty place, don't answer. If these stories got to you, share this video, leave a comment, and subscribe. But be careful. Not everyone who returns from these stories stays the same.